And with that, I would like to introduce David Bianco, who's going to be giving our second keynote of the summit here. Um, David is somebody who I've known for a number of years, had the great opportunity to work with in a few different capacities. He is working with the Target company, which we heard some folks yesterday. David is also somebody that he will probably not like that I say this, but I kind of have always seen him as kind of the godfather of threat hunting, if you will, and that's meant in the absolute highest regard. Um, it's really cool to have his perspective and expertise as he's going to be teaching Forensics 572 next week with the summit event. And when I got to sit in the class when David was teaching one of the trial runs, I learned a whole lot more about my own material, which was really kind of awesome just to hear his perspective on it. So that all said, this talk is going to be really good because it's going to talk about how we become better as a community, as an industry. And I really want you to just kind of put that email away, whatever it might be. I know it's early in the morning. Just really pay attention to this because this is going to be something that you're going to need to hear, you're going to need to absorb, and you're going to really need to think a lot about before you can take this out into your workplace and apply it, because this is going to be a very continuous process. And I don't want to steal too much away from what David's going to present. But that all being said, David, thank you so much for taking your time with us today and sharing this. And I am happy to turn this over to you, sir. And good luck with the presentation. It's going to be
Hey,
good.
thank you, Bill. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day two. Uh, Before I get started, I just want to say thanks to everyone who spoke yesterday, and also to those of you who are speaking later today. The Threat Hunting Summit is it's one of my favorite conferences every year. So I really just love learning from other hunters. So thanks to all the speakers. I also want to say thanks to the SANS staff because they do an incredible amount of work to make all this possible. So thank you very much. Giving a keynote is, well, it's a big honor, but it's more a big responsibility. I'm supposed to not only wake you up first thing in the morning, but also set a tone for the day. I think the best keynotes are also in some way inspirational. They look at a problem and they make you want to be part of the solution. They make you want to do something better, to be better. I spend a fair amount of time trying to make security better. It's something I think about a lot. I do what I can, both at a macro level by publishing things like the hunting maturity model and the pyramid of pain, and also at the micro level by lending encouragement or guidance or advice to people who are just trying to get better at security, maybe even just trying to get their first job in the field. Like, honestly, a lot of it is just me trying to be a good human. But as it turns out, being a good human is a great way to make things better for everyone. They say a rising tide lifts all boats. On the surface, you might think the infosec tide is already pretty high. And there are many more open jobs than experienced people to fill them. So it's kind of a candidate's market. Most people working in the field are paid pretty well. And every day we get new and interesting problems to work on. So most of us are never bored at work. Not all is well in the infosec harbor, though. Getting your first job in security is hard because everyone wants experienced or senior candidates instead of training up entry-level job seekers. We're subject to high levels of stress and burnout. Perhaps most importantly, many of our industry's lifeblood communications platforms often feel like cesspools of gatekeeping and toxic negativity. Security can be kind of an unwelcome or even hostile field for some people. But I'm not here to talk about how we should hire more entry-level candidates, though hit me up in my Slack channel later if you want to talk more about that. I'm also not here to talk about stress and burnout. There have been a number of really good articles and presentations and initiatives that address that in the last couple of years and do it way better than I can. I am here to talk about how we can reshape our professional community to create a more diverse, inclusive space where we can all bring our best ideas, find help and inspiration when we need it, and encourage professional growth, not just for ourselves, but for those around us too. That might sound like a tall order, and it is, but we can do it. The good news is there are 3 simple steps that we can start doing today that I think will raise the tide for everyone in security. And we do need that tide raised. If you're like me, you probably depend on social platforms like Twitter to keep up with current events in security. I follow a ton of people. It's how I find out about new attack techniques I need to be able to detect. I read about the results of new research. I just connect with friends and colleagues in the industry. I mean, it's not the sole source of any of my security information, but Twitter is usually one of the most up-to-date sources and usually also the most convenient to access. But for something so critical to our profession, Twitter is kind of a rough neighborhood. This tweet here is just like one example of the kind of pernicious gatekeeping that you might find cropping up in the middle of nearly any thread on any platform, not just Twitter. The cybersecurity community does not need people like this, he says. Well, read that tweet closely. Like what he's really saying is, I am not willing to put up with beginners, people who studied hard to learn the basics of their intended new job and just lack experience. Almost every week, I see some kind of article saying we're not even able to supply enough security people to fill our existing positions, and the demand keeps increasing. So if you're discouraging beginners, you're actually making the problem worse, not better. And by the way, if you are a beginner, just let me tell you, he is dead wrong. I know it's harder right now to get started than it should be, but we absolutely do need you. Now, this was a screenshot retweet by Gab Smash, who is previously stated publicly that she didn't come into the field via a technical path, but so I know, or at least I hope, she's being sarcastic here with her shocked face emoji, but imagine what it must be like to be a student or a career changer reading that original tweet. Like here's someone inside the industry telling you not only that you don't belong, but that you'll never belong because he doesn't want you working and gaining the experience he says that you need in order to work in the first place. Here's another example of the kind of junk you can find every day in our supposedly professional community. To me, the original tweet here just shows that not only has the person in question struck probably an appropriate work-life balance, but has apparently also been forced to defend it in a fairly blunt manner. But you know what? She's a woman, therefore Mr. Wall here has apparently decided that because she's not at everyone's beck and call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, she somehow deserves that unjust pay disparity that she's probably being forced to endure. This is unadulterated sexism, straightforward and unapologetic. Speaking of unapologetic, I barely even know what to say about this one. It's a flat out negation of the need for inclusivity and security. Like, I'm just aghast. This last example targeted my friend Jackie, who goes by Find Evil on Twitter. For some reason, she's been the target of persistent harassment by the operator of this Twitter account, which, by the way, named for one of the most racist, misogynistic groups of homophobes in security. I guess because she's a woman of color who dares to be good at hunting bad guys, and she has opinions. Here, they're publishing a photo of her home. That's her home. They did stop short of publishing her actual address, but this is a classic intimidation technique and an implicit threat that they may choose to dox her whenever they feel like it in the future. They're basically saying, I know where you sleep. I know where your kids sleep. Now, Fortunately, Jackie happens to work for the Biden-Harris campaign. So when Twitter initially refused to take action, Vice.com published a story. The headline read, "Twitter is letting people threaten Joe Biden's cybersecurity expert." Twitter was eventually shamed into shutting down the account. So on one hand, that's good. It's resolved for now. On the other hand, though, it's a shame that it took some major media attention, which is not something most of us can easily get. And don't even get me started about the fact that just having your Twitter account suspended is essentially getting away with this type of threatening behavior without any real consequence. These tweets make me angry. And I'm not trying to pick on Twitter here because I see this behavior everywhere that we as a profession get together, even in some in-person events. All this makes me angry. Maybe right now you're a little bit angry too. Let's look at some calming boats. While we're de-stressing, let's talk about what we can do to fight the types of behaviors we just saw. I'll say it up front, this is not a problem that we can solve with technology. I know that as technologists, that's often our first impulse. And certainly social media giants like Twitter and Facebook are investing heavily in technological solutions and hoping they'll work. But despite the fact that the problem is often expressed through technology, it's not really a fundamentally technological problem. It's actually a human problem, and therefore we require a human solution. And I say solution, but I don't mean that we can actually solve the problem entirely and prevent people from behaving reprehensibly. That's impossible. But what we can do, what we each can do, is take steps to actively raise the level of discourse wherever we gather, in person and online. And I do mean actively. Most of us really are good people, but being a good person isn't always obvious to others, especially if you're a silent witness to this kind of heinousness. If you want to create a more inclusive environment where everyone can contribute and feel safe doing so, we have to not just be good humans, but we have to actively be good humans. We have to look for opportunities to reach out to others, to support them, to encourage them, to help them. So what does being an actively good human look like? Well, I can't give you a full answer because there's just so many ways you could go about it. Making a list of them all wouldn't be that useful anyway. But there are 3 things I'd like to see all of us do, even some things that we can do today that I think can help create a sea change in our professional community and the way we sometimes treat others in it. With all the negativity already out there, we need to start by looking for ways to bring positivity with us into our professional lives. It's like ideally we'd be looking for ways to do this all the time, but I wanted to give you 3 concrete steps, so I just chose one example here. It's one of my favorite ways to build others up, though, and that's just finding a way to say thank you. We all have people who've helped us on our security journey. They could be a professor, a coworker, a mentor, an open source tool developer, or just someone whose work that you admire. It could be that person's job, their side hustle, or something that they do just because. Whoever they are and whatever they did for you, helping others is the sort of thing we need to promote. So why not reach out to them and let them know what they or their work has meant to you? Send them an email or a tweet, or introduce yourself at a conference, or come up with your own way. It doesn't really take that much, and a little encouragement goes a very long way. Reaching out one-on-one in private is great, but if you think it might be appropriate, doing it publicly has the added benefit of demonstrating to others that this is a thing that we do in our community. We build each other up. It contributes some real positivity in what can sometimes be a very negative space. I'll have a little bit more to say on that later. They say never ask someone to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. So I'd like to take a few minutes to say a public thank you to someone who's had a huge influence on my career, even though he may not have realized it at the time. Some of you may know Richard Baitlick, and many more of you probably know of him. He's a thought leader, but in the best sense of the word, because even though he didn't invent the concept of network security monitoring, he probably did more than any other person to promote and to popularize it. He's also just a great human who, even if he disagrees with you, will do so in such a way as to be both firm and yet civil at the same time, which can be a real trick sometimes. I first met Richard, that's met in quotes because it was only online, shortly after I was assigned to review his book, The Tao of Network Security Monitoring, back in 2004. I'd been doing intrusion detection for a little while, and when I read the NSM approach for the first time, it just made so much sense I had to try it right away. Richard wrote about Squeal, an open source NSM solution, so that's where I started. Getting it all set up, though, proved a lot easier said than done, and Richard and the other members of the Squeal project team were very helpful and generous with their time while I was trying to figure it out. I eventually joined the Squeal team myself, where I had the chance to work with Richard some more, and because of that, a few years later, he invited me to come work with him when he was the director of General Electric's CERT. I remember telling my wife, "Oh, there's no way I can say no to Richard. He just invited me to work for him." Richard has been a professional role model for me, and I can't begin to count the number of times that I've watched what he did in a certain situation and then later tried to copy him when I found myself in a similar place. In my mind, there's a meandering but very clear path in my career between meeting him and being here today as a keynote speaker. So thank you, Richard. You really helped me a lot. And I don't know if you knew it at the time, but I'm very happy to be able to tell the world just how much you helped me today. Being an actively good human, of course, means that you have to put yourself out there. That's the active part. You have to participate in the community. You have to contribute in some way. After all, can't be actively good without being active, right? You probably know the concept of paying it forward, and that's a big part of what this is all about. We just talked about recognizing those who have helped you along. So isn't the next logical step to do what you can do to return the favor by helping others? How you help, that's up to you. No one can tell you the right way to do it. It could be as simple as engaging people in the community on Twitter or in person if you're comfortable with that, asking questions, answering them for others. Even just sharing your opinions and observations on professional matters in a respectful way, of course. If you learn a new skill or you come up with a cool new hunting technique like we're seeing here at the summit, please share it. A blog post explaining it to all the rest of us can be extremely helpful. You might even come up here on stage next year or at some other conference and walk us through it in person. No matter who you are or where you are in your security journey, you do have skills and experience that the rest of us could benefit from. They don't even have to be, quote, hard tech skills. I mean, that is my specialty, but here I am talking to a technical audience about something important that has absolutely nothing to do with technology. By sharing what we're good at with others, we're not only helping everyone else grow, but we're helping to drown out those negative voices. We're amplifying the signal and making it ring out over that toxic background noise. But it's not just about amplifying the signal. I already talked about how important it is to call out the people who have helped or influenced you on your way up. By sharing what you're good at, you're opening yourself up to the possibility of being one of those influencers. Someone else is out there learning from you, maybe changing the way they think about something for the better, maybe using a tool you wrote to improve security or make their job easier. Better yet, maybe they're even taking what you did and building on it with appropriate credit to you, of course, and then putting that back out there for everyone else to take advantage of. The fact is, when you make a contribution to the infosec community, you can't really know, and probably will never know, the full effect of that contribution, because your innovations fuel other people's innovations, which go on to fuel other innovations, etc. They call it the virtuous cycle because it repeats itself over and over, potentially making big things happen from what might have been even a very small beginning. Last month, I was a volunteer for the Career Village with another conference, the Diana Initiative. I hope most of you have heard of it by now. Probably some of you have attended or maybe even volunteered there too. The Diana Initiative is specifically organized around themes of inclusion and diversity in the infosec field. It's an event for everyone, though it does emphasize the fact that members of underrepresented groups have places in security, that we have a responsibility to provide a level playing field so everyone can compete on equal footing, and that all of us should be given the same opportunities to develop and advance. This year, I think it was a little bit over 1,700 people who registered for the Diana Initiative, which is fantastic. But do you know how it started? It started with just a small group of women who met in a food court during DEF CON in 2015. They got to talking and had an idea about how great it would be to have an event where they could get together and share their experiences working in infosec, and where they could mentor and support other women. The next year, in 2016, TierraCon became an official DEF CON event, and they had panels, workshops, social events. And then the year after that, in 2017, it became a full-fledged conference in its own right. It ran concurrently with DEF CON, and that's also when they changed their name to the Diana Initiative. So for about the past 5 years, they've been enabling and advancing security careers for everyone, with an emphasis on everyone. The ideas from that food court in 2015 hatched into a full-fledged event, providing opportunities to a diverse group of practitioners and potential practitioners. And they are in turn bringing their fresh perspectives and inspiring new ideas and getting involved themselves to help others. I think this is a great idea, a great example of that virtuous cycle in action. As I was preparing for this talk, one of the things I wanted to do was watch some examples of inspiring talks. My favorite was a 2016 commencement speech that Matt Damon gave to the graduating class at MIT. In that talk, he quotes some advice that he was given by former President Bill Clinton. President Clinton's words were so much better than the ones I wrote for this slide that I decided to steal them. Yes, I stole them. So I'm quoting Matt Damon, quoting Bill Clinton, when I say that the final point in my 3-point action plan for raising the tide in security is this: turn toward the problems. What does it mean to turn toward the problems? Well, it's not enough to just recognize that there are significant roadblocks for people trying to get their first jobs or that actually want to participate in our industry. It's not enough to deplore the pervasive hostility and discrimination that some people face every day based on their gender or the color of their skin or whatever other kind of arbitrary outgroup classification other people impose on them. It's not enough to just call out these problems like I did at the beginning of this talk. We have to actually take some positive steps to remove those roadblocks, to counter that negativity, to boost the visibility and provide equal opportunities for the people affected the most by the darker aspects of our professional community. Now, how you do this, again, that's another one of those things that's up to you. And it's probably going to be different for everyone. So for myself, I started at my day job at Target. And even before that, I try to think of my role in more than just technical terms. It's not just my job to hunt threats, but it's also my job to lift up the people around me. Near the end of last year, I committed to my teammates that I would do a joint conference presentation with each one of them. I didn't quite succeed, but I certainly didn't fail either. Those of you who attended last year might have seen me up here on stage with Cat Self talking about how we revamped our hunting program. And although I'm not actually presenting with them this year, you'll notice a strong target contingent among the summit speakers yesterday and another coming up today with one of my teammates. I've been trying to ramp up my efforts outside my day job too. I've done a few rounds of Mentoring Monday on Twitter, for example, where I invited basically anyone to hit me up for career advice. And I still do, by the way, so DM me if I can help you. I'm volunteering with the DEF CON Blue Team Village's Meet a Mentor program, where we get matched up with the mentees for a longer, deeper, longer-term arrangement than we can really do during most Twitter conversations. And I already mentioned, of course, that I worked the DEF CON Initiative's Career Village this year. I'm not saying that you have to do the same things that I'm doing. What works for me may not work for you. But I know there is something you can do, even if it's just finding the people who are being targeted on Twitter and letting them know that you saw it and you care. Even that simple thing can mean a lot. And men, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but a disproportionate amount of this burden falls on us. Now, that's partly because we're typically among the least vulnerable and therefore the most well-placed to speak up and have an impact. But I'm sad to say it's mostly because our fellow men are usually the ones to blame for a lot of this bad behavior in the first place. They need to see from everyone, but especially from other men, that what they're doing is unacceptable and will no longer be silently tolerated. It's important that we not only hold that attitude, but also that we demonstrate it in person and online. Because aside from the chance to change behaviors on an individual level, acting on your beliefs in a public setting normalizes those beliefs. Just a tiny bit each time, but when we're all doing it, those tiny bits add up. And it might not take as many of us as you'd think to raise the tide. There was a 2018 survey by Dr. Damon Centola, a professor in the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania, who found that in any given group, once about a quarter of the members committed to a change, the rest of the group followed, and the change became the group's new normal. Now, his experiment had random groups of volunteers who were asked to look at pictures of different people or objects and agree on a name for those people or objects. And that turned out to be fairly quick and straightforward. Once the group agreed on a name, the researchers introduced activist groups of different sizes to try to convince the community to change that name to something else. And what they found was that when the activists made up at least 25% of the group, they were able to change the names for everyone. Of course, 25% of the information security community is a lot, but keep in mind that the researchers weren't saying that you absolutely require the entire 25% in order to make any change at all. Think of it more like an upper bound. And if there's an upper bound, then is there a lower bound? Another study, this time from Dr. Erica Chenoweth, who's a public policy professor at Harvard, used real incidents from recent history to examine the role of nonviolent civil disobedience in societal change. And she found something fascinating. No movement involving at least 3.5% of the group population failed to be successful. Certainly, movements with lower population could be and were successful, but once they hit that magic number of 3.5%, change was virtually assured. Now, why is that? Well, in part, I think because people like to back a winner. Dr. Chenoweth said, and I quote, "The visibility of civil resistance actions allows them to attract more active and diverse participation from the ambivalent people," end quote. In other words, it's important for us not only to disapprove of the attitudes and behaviors that are holding our industry back, but to demonstrate our disapproval publicly in order to attract more people to our cause. And if you're thinking that the difference between 3.5% and 25% seems pretty big, you're right. On the one hand, we can think of these as lower and upper bounds for the number of people we might need out there taking positive action. It's a perfectly valid interpretation of what might seem like conflicting data points, but I wonder if these two data points really do conflict. So Dr. Chenoweth says that the visibility of the actions was an important factor in recruiting uncommitted people to the movements. Maybe, and I think even likely, a smaller number of people who care and show that they care on a regular basis can convince enough other people to do the same until we reach that 25% tipping point. Maybe that initial number can be as small as the number of people who are watching this talk today, either live or later on recorded. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, so let me sum up, try to make this simple. I'm asking just 3 things from each of you, starting today. First, let's commit to fighting negativity by generating positivity in our professional discourse. One great way to do this, not the only way, but one great way to do this is to show your gratitude to those who have helped you along or influenced your career or even just made your job somehow easier, especially if you are willing to do it publicly. We have a break coming up right after I'm done talking. So you know what would be really great? What if everyone listening right now took just a couple of minutes of that break to send an email, a text, a tweet, whatever, to someone who helped you? Give them a sincere thank you in public if possible. I guarantee it'll make their day, and you'll feel great knowing that you contributed a little positivity today. Next, let's find ways to pay it forward by getting involved in the community. Everyone's involvement will look different, and that's great. You might offer your thoughts in a blog post or a tweet. You might teach workshops at conferences. You might do some volunteer work for an organization that you believe in. Whatever works for you, put something out there that others can be inspired by or build on. Remember, even the smallest contributions now can be the start of something big. And finally, let's remember that identifying a problem is not enough to actually solve it. When we see something wrong, we need to ask ourselves what we can do to make things better, even just a little better, and then do it. Now, I know my simple 3-point plan is just that. It's simple. You might be looking at it and saying, David, this is naive. This is never going to work. I don't know. It's not a full solution. It's not a full solution by any means, but I think of it as a good base. It's like a set of tools that we can use to help us start building the other tools that we need to solve these problems. So I hope you'll join me in looking for and taking those chances to raise up those around you. Together, I know that we absolutely can raise the tide for everyone in security. Thank you.